Now, in news that's broken just a short while ago, Russian Prime Minister Dmitry Medvedev says that his government has resigned to give President Vladimir Putin room to carry out the changes that he wants to make to the constitution. The unexpected announcement comes shortly after Putin proposed a nationwide vote on sweeping changes that would shift power from the presidency to parliament. This means Russia will also get a new prime minister. Putin says that Medvedev will take on a new job as deputy head of Russia's Security Council, which Putin chairs. Putin has asked the outgoing government to remain at work until a new government is appointed. Well, to help us unpack these developments, we're now joined live by our correspondent, Lucy Taylor, who's in Moscow in Russia. Lucy, thanks very much indeed for joining us. Has this come as a big surprise, or was something brewing?
I think to say this is surprising is something of an understatement. This is a huge day in Moscow. First of all, the speech that you were referring to there, Vladimir Putin's State of the Nation address, is in itself a landmark annual speech. He used it to propose these constitutional changes, which would make quite sweeping changes to the way that power works in this country. It was seen as a way possibly for him to pave the way to stay in power after the end of his current term as president, because this should be his last term under the current constitution. And by shifting the powers from president to prime minister and parliament, people were speculating, perhaps he's going to take on a different role after, with expanded powers. But then there was no indication that anything would change anytime soon. In fact, the president himself suggested that this should be put to the nation to vote. A referendum, we were saying, perhaps as early as this year. And then within a few hours, this huge announcement that the whole government has resigned. The Prime Minister, Dmitry Medvedev, as you said, also has resigned, and a new government will need to be appointed. So this is a very big day in Moscow, and everybody here in Moscow are left wondering what this all means and what on earth will happen next.
So Medvedev has been a long-time ally of the president. I mean, they did that job swap at one stage, prime minister to president, and then back to their original positions. Moving to the Security Council, is that a demotion? Are they still friends? What's the situation? How do we read that?
Well, he made this announcement on state television sitting next to the president. So outwardly amicable, the president has thanked him for his work. He said, in fact, that he's satisfied with the work of the government. They've all done well. And he's asked them to carry on for now in their current positions until a new government can be appointed. So there's no outward sign of a spat there or anything else. And certainly this new role for Medvedev is being created by the president to step across into the Security Council. So he's not going to disappear anytime soon. But it definitely leaves an opening, a lot of speculation here about who might be stepping into that role of prime minister, what's going to happen from here on in. And it's not really clear yet why this needed to happen now. Even the very cleverest analysts in this city are still scratching their heads a little bit, wondering, why did this need to happen now when the changes aren't coming into effect yet? In fact, they've only just been proposed, never mind confirmed. So a lot to unpack here, a lot I'm sure we'll see over the coming days that might continue to develop.
So he talks about putting these changes, these nationwide changes, to a nationwide poll. What does that mean in practical terms?
Well, I think he's suggesting a referendum, because he said these changes are so serious that people should be allowed to vote on them before they come into effect. The changes that we're talking about here, as I said, one is a kind of nuanced shift in power from president to parliament, the state council and the prime minister. There are some other things as well. He's suggesting restricting the term limits of the president. So where he himself has currently done a number of terms, as you said, doing his 2 presidential terms, then stepping back into the role of prime minister, then stepping forward again to be president for another 2 terms now. That's allowed under the current constitution. constitution. He's proposing to tweak it a little bit so that it wouldn't be allowed. It would be 2 terms total. So people wouldn't be able to repeat the move that he did in future. So slightly restricting the power of the president in that sense. He's also suggesting changes to who's allowed to stand for presidents. They're not allowed to have held or applied for foreign citizenship, for example. So a lot of changes like this. It's quite a sweeping change that he's suggesting, and I think that's the reason why he's suggested this referendum that you've spoken of. Of course, any democratic event like that is a huge event, so it would take some time to organise, but we have heard from the authorities that it could happen perhaps as soon as this year. But of course, this most recent announcement of the government throws everything into doubt.
Yeah. There are many people inside Russia who've been critics of how President Putin has run the country, almost, some might say, with an absolute hand. Would some of these changes appease some of these figures, these voices of opposition, or do they just see the same hand but dressed in different clothes?
Well, it might be that part of this government resignation is a way to make that clear, that this is a new change, a new start, a fresh start. Certainly, I do think that there's a sense that that's needed. The president himself referred to that in his speech earlier today. He said he has a feeling, he knows there's a feeling in the country that change is needed, that it's his job to make sure that that change happens. He said he wants that change to happen with dialogue, direct dialogue with citizens and direct participation of citizens. So he hinted that he's aware of that unrest, and certainly this is a time of some discontent in this country. His own poll ratings are historically low. There were mass protests last summer, thousands of people on the streets complaining about the situation in the country at the moment. There's been slow economic growth, high poverty rates. So it's not a disaster for Putin. His ratings are still solid. There's no sense that he was about to leave office completely or anything like that. But it has been a time of growing discontent here in Russia. And it may be that this change, this movement, this big, dramatic, sweeping announcement all happening on one day might be a way to try and clear the table and make a statement that this is going to be different now, to try to appease those critics that you're talking about. Whether that would be successful, though, his fiercest critics are probably not going to be appeased by this. It's now 20 years since Vladimir Putin first took power, so his fiercest critics absolutely would say it's time for a bigger change than this, time for a new face in charge. But it doesn't seem like that's going to happen anytime soon.
All right, with Medvedev moving out, any hints, speculation on who might take over as Prime Minister? And does this signal who might be president in the future?
Well, it's only just over an hour since this announcement was made, and already I think I've seen every name in the frame suggested and heard from the people in the know. There's everybody from the mayor of Moscow to several of the ministers to the chairman of the parliament, the State Duma at the moment. I don't think it's clear at the moment who that's going to be stepping up into that role. But yes, absolutely, whoever is chosen, that could be a hint towards future presidencies, although under the current constitution, that's still a number of years away. Vladimir Putin only was elected fairly recently, so he still has a while to run in his current term. But yeah, lots of names in the frame. I think it's too early to say at the moment which of them might take over, but it seems to be that Vladimir Putin himself will still have a good tight grip on the reins for the foreseeable future in any case.
All right, Lucy, we're going to leave it there. Thanks very much indeed for joining us and trying to make sense of this significant shift that's taken place. That's Lucy Taylor, our correspondent, talking to us live from Moscow in Russia. Of course, the big story of the day, the government has resigned, led by its Prime Minister Medvedev, who moves to the Security Council, where he will be deputizing for the President Vladimir Putin. We'll follow that story for you and what it might mean in the broader sense.